What Louis had asked was more than just a simple question. It was the unveiling of a truth that had been carefully guarded, one that no one had wanted to acknowledge. The monarchy had always been built on the idea of pure lineage, a belief that had been passed down through generations. But now that foundation was being questioned and no one knew how to respond. Charles, his hands trembling, could barely manage a response. "My beloved boy," he muttered, his voice cracking as though the words were the only ones he could muster in the face of such an overwhelming truth. But even that faint attempt to reassure fell flat. The damage had already been done. The kingdom was beginning to crumble, its cracks exposed for all to see. The whispers that had haunted the palace for decades now seemed like undeniable truths. Had Louis overheard something at school? Had there been a slip-up somewhere in the household? Or worse, had someone intentionally planted these seeds in the young child's mind? It was unfathomable to think that the monarchy, with all its power and history, could be threatened by something so innocent, so pure. But the truth was that Louis's question was the moment everything had changed. It had exposed cracks in the very foundation of the royal family, cracks that no one had ever dared to examine. And then, as if to make matters worse, the unimaginable happened. Word spread quickly that Diana, long gone but never truly forgotten, had foreseen this moment. Years before her tragic passing, Diana had written a letter to her sons, William and Harry. The letter, private and never meant for the public eye, contained words that would haunt the royal family forever. In it, she had written of her suspicions about the royal bloodlines, of things that didn't quite add up, things that no one dared to say aloud. "One day a child will ask a question," Diana had written, "a question that will challenge everything." And now that child had asked it. Diana's letter, which had been hidden away for years, suddenly took on new meaning. Her words, once dismissed as the ramblings of a woman in the throes of a crumbling marriage, now felt like a chilling prophecy. She had known in some way that the royal family's secrets would one day be exposed, not through scandal or accusation, but through the innocent curiosity of a child. When the letter was found and read in the wake of Louis's question, the shock was palpable. The room fell silent as aides, once again scrambling to regain control, absorbed the gravity of what had just been uncovered. The letter, sealed in a cream-colored envelope, had sat untouched for years, buried deep within the royal archives. Diana's handwriting, unmistakable, had a quiet finality to it. "When the time is right, you will understand," she had written. And now, in the aftermath of Louis's question, the time had come. Diana had warned that the bloodline would one day be called into question, and that when it happened, the monarchy would be forced to confront something much bigger than any scandal. She had written that it was not papers or titles that would define the royal family, but the hearts of the people who trusted them. The discovery of this letter was like a bombshell, one that exploded through the palace walls, shattering the carefully constructed image of the royal family. The monarchy was not just built on blood, it was built on trust, on the belief that the royal family represented something pure and untouchable. But now that foundation was crumbling. Diana's letter had always been a warning, a message that had been ignored. Now it was a stark reminder that no one, not even the royals themselves, could escape the truth forever. As the palace staff worked to manage the fallout, Charles found himself alone with the file, an old sealed document buried in the royal archives. Inside, it contained the truth that Diana had feared. DNA test results, cross-checked reports, and annotations from royal physicians, all pointing to a single, terrifying conclusion. The bloodline was not as pure as they had always claimed. There were inconsistencies, anomalies, and divergences that threatened to tear the monarchy apart. The family that had prided itself on being the epitome of royal tradition now had to confront the truth that their very existence was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. The documents revealed that one of the royal children, perhaps even Louis, might not be biologically related to the line they were supposed to come from. The implications were vast and terrifying, but the monarchy had always survived on secrecy, on the illusion of perfection. Now that illusion was being stripped away layer by layer, and with Louis's innocent question, the royal family found itself at a crossroads. What would happen if the public learned the truth? What would happen if the bloodline was called into question? The monarchy, as they had always known it, might not survive. As Charles read the documents, he realized the weight of the truth that had been hidden for so long. The palace was no longer a place of stability. It had become a house of secrets, each one more dangerous than the last. And now Louis, with his innocent question, had set everything in motion. The truth could no longer be contained. What would happen next was anyone's guess, but one thing was certain: the royal family, for better or worse, would never be the same again. The walls of Buckingham Palace trembled as these revelations began to spread. The monarchy, once thought to be unshakable, now found itself vulnerable, exposed to a world that would no longer turn a blind eye. Louis's simple, innocent question had opened the floodgates. The questions that had been whispered in the dark for years had come to light. No longer could they be ignored or swept under the rug. And while the royal family grappled with the fallout, it was clear that this was not just about lineage or DNA, it was about the very essence of what it meant to be royal. It was about truth, about integrity, and about the courage to confront what had been hidden for so long. The true destruction had only just begun, but so too had the possibility of redemption. If the monarchy could rise from this crisis, it would only be through a return to honesty, transparency, and an understanding that the people, not the bloodline, held the true power. The letter, sealed in a cream-colored envelope, had sat untouched for years, buried deep within the royal archives. Diana's handwriting, unmistakable, had a quiet finality to it, and now those words, once dismissed as the confusion of a woman trapped in a failing marriage, carried the heavy weight of foresight. "When the time is right, you will understand," she had written. And now, in the aftermath of Louis's question, the time had come. Diana had warned of a day when the bloodline would be called into question, and that when it happened, the monarchy would be forced to face something much larger than any royal scandal or media frenzy. She had written that it was not papers, documents, or titles that would define the royal family, but rather the heart of the people. The discovery of this letter was a bombshell that detonated through the very walls of Buckingham Palace. Diana's warning was not just a mother's paranoia, it was a prophecy that had finally come to life. The monarchy, which had long been considered untouchable, was now exposed, its carefully constructed image shattered. Louis's innocent question had cracked the facade, pulling the thread that unraveled years of secrecy. As the royal aides scrambled to control the fallout, Charles, consumed by guilt and fear, found himself alone in the palace's private study. The truth had always been hidden beneath layers of royal duties and tradition, but now it was out in the open, brought to light by a child's simple inquiry. Alone with the documents that had been sealed away for so long, Charles couldn't help but feel the weight of the monarchy's secrets pressing down on him. He had spent his entire life upholding the legacy of his ancestors, protecting the monarchy's purity and stability, but now the truth he had so desperately tried to keep buried had surfaced. The file was thick with reports, DNA tests, and cross-referenced medical documents, all pointing to something that no one could deny. The royal bloodline was not as pure as it had been claimed. Anomalies in genetic tests, mitochondrial inconsistencies, and unexplained deviations from expected paternal signatures all marked the royal records. For years, these documents had been hidden, classified under the strictest of royal protocols, their contents sealed away from the public eye. But now, with Louis's question hanging in the air like a dark cloud, there was no denying the truth. The implications were clear. Someone in the royal family, perhaps even Louis, might not be biologically related to the bloodline they were supposed to represent. The consequences were unfathomable. The monarchy, built on centuries of tradition, was now facing its greatest challenge. Could it survive this truth? Would the public accept the royal family if they knew that the bloodline was not as untouchable as they had been led to believe? As Charles pored over the documents, the full weight of the monarchy's fragility became painfully clear. The institution he had inherited was crumbling under the pressure of its own secrets. The foundation that had held the royal family in place for generations, blood, lineage, and tradition, was no longer reliable. As the news of the letter spread, the palace became a place of chaos. The air was thick with tension, and whispers echoed through the hallways. Everyone was wondering the same thing: who else knew? Had others in the royal circle suspected the truth all along? How long had this been hidden from the public? And now, with Louis's question exposing it all, was it too late to protect the monarchy from the fallout? In the midst of this turmoil, Camilla, who had been by Charles's side for years, found herself grappling with her own fears. She had supported him through countless controversies, weathered the storm of public opinion, but this was different. This was not just about the monarchy's survival, it was about their family's future. It was about the very legacy they had built together. But now, as the truth came to light, Camilla realized that the future they had hoped for was no longer secure. There were too many questions, too many cracks in the facade. Charles, torn between duty and personal loyalty, knew that he could not ignore the truth any longer. He had been the protector of the monarchy for his entire life, but now, in the wake of Louis's question, he could no longer protect what had been built on lies. The storm was coming, and there was no stopping it. That night, Charles sat alone in his study, staring at the pile of documents that had been hidden for so long. The weight of his ancestors' legacy pressed heavily on his shoulders, but now the truth had to come to light. For years, the monarchy had existed in a world of shadows, its true history hidden beneath layers of royal protocol. But Louis's question had pierced the darkness, and now everything was laid bare. In the midst of this, Diana's letter lingered in the background, a haunting reminder of the truth she had known long before anyone else. Her words had been a warning, a prophecy of what was to come, and now the monarchy was at a crossroads. Would they face the truth, or would they continue to live in denial, hiding behind the walls of the palace? Charles knew that this moment would define the future of the royal family. The monarchy had always been built on trust, on the belief that the royal family represented something pure and untouchable. But now that illusion was shattered. The truth had been revealed, and it was up to Charles and the royal family
that spoke
to decide what
volumes.
came next.
Homeschooling was
Charles sat motionless in
arranged
his
swiftly,
study, the weight of the
overseen
royal
by
history he had
professionals
spent
who
his
understood.
entire life upholding now feeling impossibly heavy. He stared down at the file, the one that had been sealed away in the royal archives for decades, untouched by the outside world. The time had come, and now it was all laid out before him. The letter from Diana, which had been a whispered prophecy, and the shocking revelations hidden in these documents, everything was converging in a way no one had ever anticipated. His hands trembled as he opened the file. It felt as if the truth, long buried in layers of royal secrecy, was rushing out in a torrent. DNA test results that had once been neatly tucked away, reports cross-referenced by royal physicians, and the bold annotations revealing what had been hidden for so long, they all pointed to the same thing. The bloodline was not as pure as they had always claimed. The monarchy, once thought to be above reproach, was now facing the terrifying reality that the very foundation upon which it stood was flawed. There were discrepancies, anomalies that could not be ignored. The royal bloodline, the symbol of unity, tradition, and centuries of unbroken lineage, was in question. Genetic tests, once believed to be routine, now seemed like the key to unraveling the very fabric of the monarchy. These documents, carefully sealed for years, now revealed inconsistencies that could bring the entire institution to its knees. The truth was undeniable, and Charles, the man who had inherited this legacy, was now the one forced to bear the burden of it. As Charles read through the reports, the words blurred before his eyes. It was as if the documents themselves were a mirror, reflecting the long-hidden truths that had always loomed just beneath the surface. The royal family had spent years carefully curating its image, an image of purity, tradition, and unwavering authority. But now, with the weight of these findings pressing down on him, Charles understood that those carefully constructed illusions were fragile, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. The family, once the epitome of royal tradition, now found itself in the midst of an existential crisis. What would happen if the truth came out? What would the public think if they learned that the bloodline had been tainted, that the very foundation of the monarchy had been built on a lie? The public had always placed their trust in the royal family, believing in their lineage, their purity. But now that trust was in jeopardy. How could the monarchy survive if it could no longer rely on the one thing that had defined it for centuries, its bloodline? In that moment, Charles felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The monarchy was not just an institution, it was a symbol of stability, tradition, and continuity. But now that symbol was being questioned in the most fundamental way. The truth that had been hidden for so long had come to light, and there was no turning back. The implications were staggering. If the royal family's bloodline was in question, what did that mean for the future of the monarchy? How could Charles, as the reigning monarch, reconcile his duty to protect the institution with the undeniable reality that the foundation he had been raised to uphold was crumbling before him? He had always believed in the sanctity of the royal bloodline, but now, faced with these documents, he was forced to confront the harsh truth. The monarchy had always been built on more than just blood. It was built on trust, on the belief that the royal family represented something pure, untouchable. But that trust had been shattered, and in its place, uncertainty loomed. Charles knew that the discovery of these documents, coupled with Louis's innocent question, would have far-reaching consequences. The monarchy was no longer the unassailable institution it had once been. It was fragile, vulnerable, and exposed. The royal family, once seen as untouchable, was now facing the kind of scrutiny it had never encountered before. And it was all because of one simple question from a child. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Charles couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal. He had spent his life protecting the monarchy, defending it from criticism, from scandal, from doubt. But now that same institution was turning on him, its carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of truth. The bloodline was not as pure as they had always claimed, and the consequences of that revelation could very well bring the monarchy to its knees. The door to the royal study creaked open, breaking Charles from his thoughts. Camilla stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She had been by his side through countless challenges, but this was different. This was not just a political crisis, it was a personal one. She stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the documents scattered across the desk. "I didn't want to believe it," Charles said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of everything he had just uncovered. "But it's all true, isn't it?" Camilla's gaze softened, but there was a trace of something else in her eyes, a fear, a realization that their world was about to change forever. "We've always known the monarchy wasn't perfect," she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet resolve. "But this is something else." Charles nodded, the burden of leadership weighing heavily on him. He had always believed in the monarchy, in its ability to endure and withstand the pressures of time. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was possible. "How do we move forward from this?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "How do we protect everything we've built when everything is built on a lie?" Camilla stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The monarchy is not just built on bloodlines," she said softly. "It's built on resilience, on the ability to adapt, to evolve. We can't erase the past, but we can shape the future. We have to face the truth, even if it means tearing everything down and rebuilding it." Charles looked at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "But at what cost? If we tell the world the truth, what happens to us, to the monarchy?" Camilla's grip tightened on his shoulder. "We face the consequences together, but we can't let fear keep us from doing what's right. The truth may be painful, but it's the only way forward." And as the weight of the monarchy's uncertain future pressed down on him, Charles realized that Camilla was right. The truth was the only way forward, and no matter the cost, they would have to confront it together. The documents now laid bare before Charles revealed a staggering truth that had long been concealed. One of the royal children, perhaps even Louis himself, might not be biologically linked to the bloodline they had been taught to revere. The implications of this revelation were nothing short of catastrophic. For centuries, the monarchy had survived on the belief in its purity, the belief that the bloodline was as untouchable as the crown itself. But now that illusion, so carefully constructed and guarded, was being torn apart. Each page Charles read seemed to unravel another layer of the grand narrative they had all been living, revealing a reality that none had dared to acknowledge. With Louis's innocent, seemingly harmless question, the royal family found itself at a critical juncture. The question had come from a child, but its consequences were immense, stretching far beyond the walls of the palace. What would happen if the public ever learned the truth? What would happen if the very foundation of the monarchy, the bloodline, was called into question? The monarchy, as they had always known it, might not survive such an exposure. It was the most dangerous and vulnerable moment the royal family had ever faced. As Charles read through the documents, he felt the crushing weight of the truth sink in. The palace, once a symbol of stability and strength, now felt like a house of cards, precariously held together by years of carefully curated secrets. The monarchy, built on the notion of continuity and tradition, was now in jeopardy. Every royal servant, every trusted aide had known their place in the grand structure. But now that structure seemed fragile, ready to crumble at the slightest shake. And the shake had come. Louis's question had started a chain reaction, a ripple effect that no one could control. Charles understood the gravity of the situation. The truth had been hidden for so long, buried deep within royal archives and concealed behind layers of propriety and tradition. But now, with Louis's unintentional revelation, the palace's secrets were no longer confined to the shadows. What would come next was uncertain, and as Charles sat alone in the quiet study, surrounded by the very documents that had shattered his understanding of the monarchy, he realized that there was no turning back. The world, the public, the media, they would all demand answers. How could they hide the truth now? For better or worse, the royal family would never be the same again. The illusion of untouchable perfection that had defined them for generations was gone, exposed for the world to see. And in its place was an uncertain future, one that was now dependent on how the monarchy would respond to this terrifying truth. Could they rebuild their image, restore the trust they had lost? Or would this be the beginning of the end for an institution that had been at the heart of British life for over 1,000 years? As Charles grappled with the enormity of what he had just uncovered, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal, not just toward the institution he had dedicated his life to, but toward his family. The very foundation of their identity had been built on something false, and now, with Louis's innocent question, that foundation was crumbling before his eyes. The monarchy, once considered a pillar of strength, was now facing the harshest of realities. The truth was no longer something they could keep hidden. In that moment, Charles understood the true cost of secrecy. It was not just about preserving the monarchy, it was about protecting the legacy they had built for future generations. But now that legacy was in jeopardy. He knew that no matter how hard he tried to control the narrative, the truth would eventually come to light. And when it did, there would be no way to put it back in the shadows. As the weight of the situation settled upon him, Charles also understood that this was not just a political crisis, it was a personal one. His role as king was not just about governing, it was about ensuring the survival of the institution he had inherited. And now, with the bloodline in question, his very legitimacy was at risk. The very thing that had defined him as a monarch, his ancestry, was now the thing that could bring him down. For a moment, Charles allowed himself to imagine a world where the monarchy was no longer what it had always been. A world where the royal family was no longer a symbol of untouchable tradition. It was a terrifying thought, one that forced him to confront the fragile nature of power and legacy. The monarchy was, in so many ways, a house built on a foundation of myth, and now that myth was exposed for what it truly was. The future was uncertain, and for the first time in his life, Charles wasn't sure if he had the strength to face what was coming. What would happen next was anyone's guess. Would the monarchy survive this test, or would it be swept away by the revelations that Louis had unintentionally brought to light? The royal family, once the embodiment of continuity, now stood at the precipice of an uncertain future. How could they preserve what they had when everything they had been taught to believe in was now under suspicion? How could they reconcile the past with the truth? One thing was certain, the monarchy, for better or worse, would never be the same again. And with Louis's innocent question, the royal family's fate had shifted, leaving them with only one choice: to face the truth no matter the cost. The House of Secrets was no longer a safe haven. It was a house on the brink of collapse, and only the truth could determine whether it would rise again or fall into history.